Phil here from Amniotically Tanked, and today I'm going to show you how I painted this Imperial Fist Tactical Marine for the Horus Heresy by Games Workshop. For the armor, I start by giving an all-over coat of Scale 75 Deep Red over a white undercoat. We use red here because later on when we apply yellow over top of this will become a nice orange-brown color that will look really good in the shadows. After this layer of red is down, I then start adding a white zenithal highlight over the majority of this model. I keep building up the white highlights until I have most of the model covered with this lighter white color with only a pinkish shred in the recesses remaining. Next, I evenly spray on a mixture of 50/50 Scale 75 yellow ink and thinner. This is built up over 2 or 3 layers to get a deep and bright yellow color that is perfect for the Imperial Fists. For the final step of the armor, I come in and do a little more shading with a mixture of about 75% to 25% thinner to Scale 75 chestnut ink. For this step, I'm really trying to push the shadows a little bit deeper and get a little more contrast on the model. After allowing the ink layers a couple of hours to dry, I add shoulder pad decals and then another layer of varnish to lock those decals in. Next, I go and give the entire model an even coat of Streaking Grime by MIG. Instead of brushing on the Streaking Grime, you can put it through an airbrush to get a thin, even coat that will dry even faster than this one. If you do so though, please remember to wear a mask as enamel paints are fairly toxic and I don't think you want to be breathing them in. Once the Streaking Grime has dried and looks completely matte, I go back in and start removing it with a makeup sponge and a little bit of white spirits. One of the really cool things with Streaking Grime is it actually leaves, well, as the name suggests, streaks whenever you remove it in this manner. So in order to make sure the streaks are going in the direction you want them to, all you have to do is make sure you're moving the sponge in that same direction, and the streaks will be left behind. At this stage, I also spray the model with another coat of matte varnish to lock in the enamels and kill off any shine from the previous gloss varnish stages. To really sell the appearance that this model's been through a war zone or two, and is out of time to repaint their armor, I lean heavily on the sponge chipping technique. To do so, I start by taking a foam sponge, such as the kind you get in GW blister packs, ripping off a small chunk, and dipping it into Rhinoxhide by Games Workshop. Then I gently dab off the majority of the paint on the sponge on a spare paper towel, and then tap that sponge to the edges of the Space Marine's armor and other places where I want the chips to appear. As these chips represent where parts of the Marine's armor might have caught on various rubble or other battlefield debris as they move across the battlefield, I want to ensure that I'm focusing mostly on areas that are most likely to bump up against environmental objects, such as the edges of armor. Next, I repeat this process with a silver paint. In this case, I use Thrash metal by Scale 75. I go a little bit lighter than before with the Rhinoxhide, but this is just to give a little more interest to the edges and to represent metal that's shown through the chips as well. Finally, I come back in and do a very light sponge chipping of Amarillo Yellow by Scale 75. This is probably the most reserved chipping of them all so far, and this is really to represent light scratches and dings that the armor went through that didn't necessarily scratch all the way through the paint, but gave a little scratch or ding that would reflect light. I also add a couple more scratches here to just kind of push that visual interest and texture a little farther. In this case, I start by painting a very thin line with Rhinoxhide, and then another line underneath that with Amarillo Yellow again to again represent the light reflecting off of that scratch in the paint. For all the ribbing and cabling on this model, such as the pieces across the chest and the places behind the knees, I start with a layer of Anthracite Gray from Scale 75, which I then followed up with a layer of Nuln oil from Games Workshop. Because these areas are so textured, the Nuln oil will fall into the recesses and give a very nice shaded and high contrast look without the need for any kind of edge highlighting. At this point, I also paint the ribs flat black by Scale 75. For the eyes, I start by painting the entire lens black. Next, I paint progressively smaller layers of Scale 75 Deep Red, Antares Red, and Mars Orange towards the lower part of the lenses. Finally, I paint a dot of pure white in both the top and bottom corners of the eye. For the bolt gun, I start by painting the bolt gun casing flat black by scale 75, and the rest of the metal parts, Thrash metal, also by scale 75. Next, I wash all the silver parts with a mixture of 50/50 Druchii Violet and Nuln oil by Games Workshop. I use Druchii Violet here in this mix because I wanted to get a little bit of purple onto this model, as it is a complement of yellow and I think adds a little bit of visual interest to the model. But if I went with just pure violet here, it would have been overpowering and not look like metal. So I mixed it in with the black to get a little bit of a purple sheen here without being too overpowering, and I think the result looks really good. After hitting the edges of the black with a slight edge highlight of Anthracite gray, the gun's ready to be glued on, and the model is finished except for the base. As I wanted this Imperial Fist to be based on the Siege of Terra, I decided to put him on a flagstone base that I had created a couple of years back. In my mind, I imagine Terra as a mixture of old architecture with new Imperial structures, so I think these old worn stones give the perfect appearance to Imperial Fist fighting at the siege. To start with, I layered on German uniform from Vallejo model colors over a black primer. I chose this color because I wanted to have a little bit of a green hue to the bases, and even though this color will be covered up by later steps, my hope is that a little bit of this green will show through to add some more visual interest to the model. Next, I sponge on layers of Scale 75's Petroleum Gray, Brown Gray, and Rain Gray. I really like sponging for this step as well because it gives some more texture to the base and makes it look more like pitted and worn stone, really pushing that effect I'm going for of ancient flagstones. For the last step of the stones, I come in with a light dry brush of Nectar by Scale 75. For this, I focused mostly on the edges of each of the pavers to provide a little more definition and separation between each of the stones on the base. After these steps though, I felt the base was still a little bit too plain and could use a little more color added into it. So I added some weathering powder into the cracks between the stones, as well as some extremely watered down acrylic Camoshade by Games Workshop to get a little more of the green tint and to represent grime and various, algae and mosses that might be growing between the stones. To put the final touches on the base, I add a few small tufts of the Games Workshop static grass clumps between the cracks in the stones, paint the rim of the base black, and add a few small dots of Blood for the Blood God on one of the flagstones on the base. So that's how I painted this tactical marine for the Imperial Fists. If you liked this tutorial, please don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Also, as this is one of my first videos, and I plan to do a few more of these, well, at least for all 18 of the legions for the Horus Heresy, I would love to hear your feedback or any comments you have of how I can make this better. Also, what legions do you want to see me do next? Any that I should focus on first? Thanks for watching, and have a great day.